So here we are. We're going to go online, and today I'm going to try to make a video about mixing. I know you guys worked with Andy the other day, but I thought I would give you my sort of ideas about how to get started with it. Probably break this up into at least a couple of videos. So let's get right into it. The first part is going to be all about kind of setting up the mix. And I've got some files that I will send out to everybody, and I'm going to use those same files right now. So let's create a session. Um, I've already got one started here. Let me go back. I'll close this out. So let's create a new session here. Um, this one, mix project one, just a rhythm section. It's drums, bass, and keyboards, keeping it kind of simple just to get started. Don't want to throw too many things at you. And we can talk about the fundamentals of getting a mix set up this way. So the files that I'm sending are 44.1 16-bit. And so that's kind of keeping the file size smaller, be easier for moving things around on the internet. So when you create your session, your mix project, those are the parameters that you want to follow. 44.1 kilohertz, 16-bit. The rest of the stuff doesn't matter. We're not doing any editing or working on the timeline in terms of the grid, just mixing. So I'm going to call this mix project one and hit OK. And now I'm going to import the files. So I'm going to go back to my drive here and grab the files. All right, so you'll notice that they all have the letters SL in front. That's just the song title of the tune that we were working on. It's called Still Life. And then you'll see all of the tracks here kind of in alphabetical order. So I'm just going to drag those on my screen. Try again. Cool. So I've got them on the screen. And because they were in alphabetical order, they're not really in a mix order. So let's talk about setting up the mix. I'm clicking up here on the bar, the sort of timeline, and just dragging it up, and that's just narrowing my view so I can kind of get a lay of the land. To switch to the mixer view, I'm just going to hit the number 3 key on the keyboard, which pulls up the mixer view. And if you double click right here, it'll expand it to a full screen. All right, so I don't need to look at instruments right now because we don't have any instruments in this session. It's all just audio files. And if I want to just look at the tracks, it should look something kind of like that. So get the tracks into your session. And now we've got audio files. If I go back to just the sort of arrangement window, we can kind of see stuff here. But it's not in mix order. So the first thing that I probably would do is organize my files and get them into mix order. So there is kind of a convention for the way that we name tracks and also for how we set up the mix. We typically do drums, then bass, guitar, then harmony instruments, and then melody, or maybe it's vocals, maybe things like percussion or whatever else we're adding onto the end. But certainly, I would say most people set up their mix so that the drums are the first thing, then the bass instrument, then the harmony instruments, keyboards, guitars, things like that. So that's how I've got mine set up, or that's how I want to get it set up. So the drums themselves also have a mix order. And go over to my whiteboard here. Usually we do something kind of like this. So for the drums, we usually go kick, snare, hi-hat, tom 1, tom 2, floor tom, and then the overheads. which is going to be left and right. Sometimes people will record that those overhead mics as a stereo pair. Here we did it as individuals. So if you look back on the session here, I'm going to arrange the tracks the same way that I did over here. So you can just drag these. So let's look for kick. That's the one that says K. I'm just going to take that. I'm going to drag it over to the left. Next on the list, we have snare drum. It's going to be SN. Where's the snare drum? All the way over here. Next, we have hi-hat. And then toms, 1 and 2. I can actually shift-click these and drag them over as a pair. Then we have floor tom. And then our overheads, left and right. So I can, again, shift-click, drag these over, put them right there. And now we've got all the drums in order. So it's kick, snare, hi-hat, tom 1, tom 2, floor tom, overheads left and right. And now that I've got the drums in the correct order, I just want to make them all the same color. So I'm going to click on the overhead right. I'm going to shift-click on overhead left, go down to any one of them. Now that they're all selected, just click once in the color bar and pick a color. So I'll go ahead and make the drums blue. So now all my drums are the same color, makes it easier to see them. Here's the bass. That's good. I wanted that next. I'm going to make it a different color. Let's go with like an orange or something. So it's very easy to see. And then the same thing for the keys. So I'm just going to shift click, go down here, and we'll make the keyboards, I don't know, how about some sort of yellow? Okay. So now we can very easily see how we've got all the tracks arranged. So I've got them in mix order, kick, snare, hi-hat, toms, overheads. I've got the bass next, then the keyboards. I've got everything colorized. Next thing I want to do is to create mix groups. And this maybe is more important when we're doing editing and we want things to happen as a group for editing. But even for mixing, there'll be times when you want to adjust the overall volume of the whole kit and have all the faders kind of move relative to each other. So I'm going to shift-click all the drums so that they're highlighted. And then I'm going to double-click or right-click, on one of the tracks and just say Group Selected Tracks. And I'm going to call this Drums and hit OK. And now that they're in a group, they've got this little group designation. If I move one of them, they all move together. And if I needed to move just one of these tracks, I can hold the Alt key and move an individual fader. And we're going to do that for sure because we want to set up our rough mix of just the drum kit. So we're going to need to sort of bypass that group designation. The other thing you can do on the left-hand side of the screen over here is click on Groups. And then it shows all the groups that you've created and you can turn them off and on right there. So that's another way to do it. So let's do the same thing with the keys. I'm going to just click and then shift click on my keys, right click, group selected tracks. We're going to call it keys. And you can see that it shows up on the screen with our groups. So now we have a keys group and we have a drums group. Excellent. We've created mix groups. And so probably the next thing that I would do at this point is just hit play, start listening, and just do a rough mix where I'm trying to balance maybe the sound of the drums to each other. In fact, sometimes I might just listen to everything all at once, or maybe I would bring faders down and kind of bring them up and see how everything behaves, relative to each other. So I think there's no right or wrong way. I'm going to pull the keyboards back. I'm going to pull back the bass, and I'm just going to check out the drums for a minute. So let's go back to this view, go back to the beginning and hit play and just listen to this. Andy's calling me. Sorry, Andy. I just dropped Andy. Cool. So I'm going to go back to my mixer view. I'm going to turn off the drums group, right? And kick drum sounds really big. Pull that back. And I'm just kind of, the hi-hat is really strong. So I'm going to pull back the hi-hat. Cool. So the next thing I might do is just, after I've kind of got some basic levels set, is just set up some panning. So we recorded these drums from the audience point of view. So if I take my overheads, I'm just going to solo the overheads for a second. And I'm going to go ahead and pan them out. And you should hear the hi-hat on your right side. That's the way it was recorded. It was audience perspective. And when you just open up the overheads and solo them like this, you get a feel for where things are at in the whole mix, right? So now I can set up the rest of my panning to match my overheads. If you're not sure how it was recorded, that's usually what I do is I just solo the overheads and listen in wide stereo and say, okay, where's the hi-hat? And it should be audience perspective. It should be on the right-hand side. So I'm going to take my hi-hat and pan it to the right. Tom number 1 is also going to be a little bit to the right. Tom number 2 could be to the left a little bit. And the floor tom should be far to the left. And there's no right or wrong way here. I'm kind of mixing the drum set with the full stereo image. If you wanted a more realistic kind of live mix, you might actually put the drums off to one side or the other. And some of the early recordings that were made with less microphones, the drums might have been literally in mono and they were just on one side of the stage. So this is kind of a more contemporary view where we kind of spread the drums out. I like it because I'm a drummer, so I kind of like the idea of being able to put the drums on the whole sound stage. So while I'm here talking about stereo image, let me do a little graphic over here on the whiteboard. So I might have done this in class once before, but I try to imagine that the whole stereo image looks something like this. I've got a person. These are his or her ears. And we're looking from the top down, the top of this person's head. And so for them, the right ear is here and the left ear is here. And then we have this basically an arena, a stereo playing field. And there's left and right, and then there's close and there's far. And there's different ways to move things around in this stereo image, but essentially, when things are louder, they are closer to us. And then I'll put a minus sign up there. Things that are softer feel farther away. So you can take an element of your mix, let's say like the kick drum. And if you want the kick drum to be loud and you want it to be in the center, then you would put the kick drum right there. Or at least that's how we would perceive it as we're listening to the mix. If I turn the kick drum down, then it moves farther away from us relative to everything else, right? If it's the only thing there, then it's just however loud or soft you have the volume turned up on playback. But relative to everything else that's going on, I can make it come closer or farther away in terms of volume. So typically, often, there's no rules here, but often the kick and the snare are pretty much in the middle of a mix, and they're fairly prevalent on the drums. So I've got the kick and the snare pretty loud, and then I have the overheads pulled up right now as well, and they are, observing the stereo image. So the overheads are left and right. And then according to what you see on my mixer right now, the tom number 1 is a little bit farther back, and it's to the right. Tom number 2 is just left of center and a little bit back from the kick and snare. And the floor tom is to the left. So I'll put floor tom. So I just kind of wanted to do sort of a visual diagram of where the elements are in this sort of stereo image, as well as what you see on the mixing console. And we just think about having kind of a place for everything and everything in its place. And keep in mind that you can't have 15 objects that all occupy the exact same space, because then they will basically mask each other out. So part of mixing is sort of finding this cohesive balance where you find a space for everything to live in. And that helps to allow the different elements of a mix to come through and be heard without just turning everything up all the time. So if I have other parts of this mix that I want to hear, maybe I will find a little place for them to live. For instance, the keyboards. Maybe I'm not going to pan them hard left and right. Maybe the keys are going to be here and there. So if you look at my mixer, I'm going to take my keys, and I'm not going to go all the way left and right. I'm going to go, in the 70s. And then I'll pull this up in the mix. The bass, we're going to leave in the middle. Cool. So now we have just a basic set of levels. It's honestly kind of hard for me to hear because I have my back turned to my speakers. But we have a basic setup of levels, and we have panning. And that's the first thing that I would do before I use any plugins, EQ, compression, nothing like that. I'm just going to think about my stereo image. I'm going to get some basic levels going and see that it feels balanced from instrument to instrument, and then find a home for everything in the stereo image. The other thing that I would say about the drums is that it's a lot of microphones that are opened up. So understand that things like overhead microphones pick up everything, including the room. So you can change the sound of a drum set by either making those overheads, pretty strong, in which case you're going to pick up a lot of room. Or if you want to dry up the kit and tighten up the kit, you can bring the overheads down and go for more of a close miking kind of a sound. So I would just encourage you to open up the session, get the files in there, do a basic organization, set up your basic levels and panning, and see how good you can make it with just this. And that would be step 1. All right, give it a go. Talk to me in the discussion forum. Let me know how this works for you, and I'll start working on video number 2. Thank you.